Welcome to the first Arcview Access webinar. I'm really pleased to be here with my esteemed colleagues and my, just the whole Arcview community and cannabis community coming together. We had a pretty remarkable response to this webinar, which we announced just like last week. Over 1,600 people have registered for this webinar, which just shows how much interest there is in the cannabis sector right now. With so much changing, we really do need each other more than ever to really understand and to make sense of all the ways in which this crisis is impacting all of our businesses. But before I go into all of that, I do just want to take a moment to say I hope that you and your loved ones and your employees are safe and in a safe place, and just want to send my heart out to anybody who's really struggling right now. I think a lot of people in a lot of parts of their lives, this has been really hard on, and particularly given the cannabis sector, I want to point out that a lot of people, because we've been designated, thankfully, in most places as an essential business, many people have employees who are on the front lines interacting with other humans all day to get people the medicine that they need. And so just want to give a shout out to the heroes that are out there on the front lines communicating with the public. And also for so many of the compromised patients and older patients and consumers, cannabis consumers out there who are at greater risk right now. And then lastly, the prisoners, cannabis prisoners who are stuck in there right now while we're all going through this. So as we talk about the economics and we talk about the opportunities here for our businesses, it's just so important. And I'm reminding myself that, there's a human being on the end of every one of those front lines, and that is so important as we figure out how to navigate this unprecedented situation. And ahead of this webinar, we sent out a message to our members, the Arcview investor members, and asking them what is their thoughts on this. What do you think is happening with the changes to the industry, and how is it affecting your investment strategy? How is it affecting how you conduct your business, and what do you think about the prospects for the future? And we got so many really great responses from that. Some people are thinking about, at the time, was this going to be considered an essential service? And in most places it is considering that. But what happens with supply lines if supply lines get hit? Obviously, when people are staying at home and they're stocking up on essentials, turns out cannabis people really like. The data is pretty strong that people are buying a lot of cannabis during this time. And but will that hold up? Will they keep coming back to buy more cannabis during that time? And how hard does it become, particularly in some of the states that are new online, to actually fulfill that demand if there are other parts of the supply chain that get affected by that? And then when it comes to capital, when there's this much upheaval, capital moves differently. And how are people going to respond to that shift in capital? Some investors are getting excited because they feel like there's going to be a lot of great bargains right now in investing. That being said, other investors are saying that, well, when the markets are doing this up and down, they're either have less money or are more interested in putting money into things that they can see a huge bump on because there's so many opportunities outside of the cannabis sector. So we'll get a chance to dig into some of those questions over the next hour. And we've just got an incredible panel of people here. I mean, it's just like amazing when I think about who we're able to bring together. It turns out it's a lot easier to do this online than in person. So there's some silver linings in this whole webinar business. But we're really excited to have folks from some of the most well-known companies: Eaze, Caliva, Weedmaps, Entourage Effect Capital, and of course, my business partner and colleague and, godfather of the cannabis world, Steve DeAngelo, is with us as well. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Steve for a few minutes just to share his initial thoughts on where things are in the sector, and then we'll move into the sort of the meat of everything. So, Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Troy. And like Troy, I'd just like to open with an expression of love and concern for all of you, especially those of you who are in my age cohort. Please take the situation seriously. I've been doing that, and I'm urging everybody who's got a few gray hairs to really do that as well. So very interesting things we're seeing here. Of course, our first response was just to do everything that we could think of in order to keep our clients and to keep our staff safe. And that's involved everything from protective gear to instituting curbside pickup at all of our shops. Fortuitously, in Desert Hot Springs, we had a drive-through, which is already ready to go to serve this epidemic. So it's been very popular. And the same pattern is happening throughout the state in California. There have been a lot of statistics that have been going out, but the upshot is that we're seeing a tremendous spike in sales. Whether or not, how long that lasts, I guess is still an open question, but my guess is that you're definitely going to see some increase just by virtue of people having more time on their hands and having more need to find a bit of calm and serenity and humor in their days. So I think that we'll continue to see some of that. It's really, I think, a testament to the generations of activists who have worked for so long, especially in California, but around the country, to change the paradigm of cannabis from an intoxicant to a wellness product. And I think that the underlying reason that we've seen cannabis declared essential is because we've done a very, very good job of that over the years. And I've been talking to a lot of reporters who were somewhat bemused, and I just really started explaining to them what we've learned in California, which is that cannabis is a first line of defense for many, many medical conditions. And instead of going to doctors' offices or hospitals or pharmacies, a lot of folks are able to just come into us at the dispensaries, and we can keep the load off of the other medical facilities. So we're proud to be able to play that role. We're grateful that the state of California and our local authorities have recognized that and are just doing everything that we can to keep everybody safe and well medicated.
Great. And Steve, can you give us like a little bit of what it's like out there on the front lines right now, or at least reports of what it's like on the front lines? Because I guess you haven't been out there, but at Harborside in particular, how have sales been? How's it been working out there?
Well, we've had our biggest sales day ever last Monday, so sales have been very, very strong. People are grateful. They're really grateful that we are open, that we're continuing to supply them with medicine. They're very, very pleased with the curbside pickup. I think that one of the interesting things to think about is moving forward, what changes in California cannabis out of this experience. I think one of the changes is that curbside pickup is probably here to stay. But there's a great deal of concern. We already serve a population which has pre-existing medical conditions, a lot of immunodeficiencies. Of course, we here in the Bay Area grew out of the last huge infectious disease crisis here. The AIDS crisis is really the roots of the industry here. So it's not something that feels completely unfamiliar to us, and we know that cannabis helps everybody who's dealing with medical issues. So we're just trying to be there as much as we can for everybody.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind too is anxiety, right? I mean, I think far more people are struggling with anxiety around this than they are with coronavirus at the moment, right? Since most people don't have coronavirus. And cannabis can be so valuable for people in those kinds of situations. Are you hearing a lot about that from a lot of patients?
Well, yeah, I mean, anxiety, right? But you just look at the mental effects of cannabis. It helps bring calm. It helps bring some sense of compassion, some sense of reflection, bring some humor into situations which might not otherwise appear to be humorous. And these are all qualities that we very much need right now. And I think that it's if you think about why is cannabis essential, look, if people didn't have cannabis to keep themselves on an even keel right now, they'd be going for the booze, they'd be going for the tranquilizers, they'd be going for the opioids, they would be going for substances that are a lot more dangerous. So I think it's absolutely appropriate that it's considered essential. And I sure don't want to think about going through this without my cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What can people do to help people in this crisis? You want to share a little bit about Last Prisoner Project?
Sure. What I'm most concerned right now about is those people from the cannabis community who are unable to take any measures to protect themselves. And at the top of that list is our prisoners who are in situations that are just unbelievable. We've been getting photos and reports straight out of the prisons, and things are going on that are just, you have guards who are stealing all the toilet paper and hoarding it and pilfering it. People are unable to have access to disinfectants, to wipes of any kind because of the alcohol content in those wipes. There's a doctor that's available twice a week if you stand in a very, very long line and you have the money for a copay. Folks don't have an opportunity to control their social distance or even the air they breathe. So unsurprisingly, there's coronavirus is now fairly widespread throughout jails and prisons, both in the federal system and the state system and at the local level. And we are asking people to go to lastprisonerproject.org to find a link to the petition that we are asking folks to sign. We're calling on the immediate release of all cannabis prisoners. There's 40,000 plus of them across the country who never should have been locked up in the first place and certainly don't deserve a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So help us out if you can, lastprisonerproject.org.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. And I think that brings up a good point, which is that, there's a lot of things that we really find out what's essential in situations like this. And we've known for a long time that nonviolent cannabis prisoners shouldn't be there. So now's a good opportunity for people to be let out. But it also changes the opportunity from a political standpoint in the cannabis sector. So we have a really, when we look back at alcohol prohibition and we see one of the things that led the federal government to pass an end to alcohol prohibition more swiftly was people they needed to get out of a depression. And so I think that, I think people's, resistance to legalization and moralistic stands against it right now, when they're looking at incredible deficits and needing to get people back to work and needing to fill the federal and state coffers, everything changes. And so coming out of this, I think a lot of places are going to need those resources, and that potentially the political movement, we can move much faster towards federal legalization than we were ever able to before. And so I think that really changes the game and makes the prospects for the cannabis sector even greater as we pull out of this. Because I'm chair of the board of the Marijuana Policy Project and serve on the board of the National Cannabis Industry Association. And we're certainly thinking about that and how to make that case that cannabis industry can from a financial standpoint, can also help chip in here in a big way. Unfortunately, it looks like we're getting left out of the stimulus package, which is unfortunate and is wrong. But we live to fight another day, and we live to keep making that case. With that, thank you, Steve. With that, I'm really excited to pass the mic over, or I guess we're not passing maybe mics anymore, but over to my colleague, Codie Sanchez. Codie is a partner at Entourage Effect Capital, which is one of the largest venture funds in the cannabis sector. Also one of the largest investors in Arcview, and we get a chance to serve on the board here together. And Codie really, really gets it and has been in the thick of it with a lot of portfolio companies and talking to a lot of companies and about how they're handling all of this. And she is going to host and moderate the rest of the next segment here. So Codie, please take it away.
Thanks, Troy. Thank you, Troy and Steve, for your leadership and insight as always. I'm excited to be here with everybody. It's interesting, Troy, to your point, we were doing some statistics and research surrounding this new stimulus bill. And in it, we found, for instance, that there are more cannabis employees to the tune of 5 times more cannabis employees than there are coal employees. And so one of the largest industries from a lobbying perspective we know is the coal industry, and yet they're included in it and cannabis is not. So I think we're going to find all of these gems on this conference call today to not only make smart investment decisions, because that's what we do here at Arcview is make investments to be able to lifeblood and sustain this industry and the companies in it, but also to be able to enact political change. And so hopefully you'll hear from, Steve and Troy on how to do that with Last Prisoner Project, but also how to push our senators and local representatives in order to benefit this industry overall. So let's jump right in. What the goal of this is to glean insight from some of the largest cannabis C-suite executives out there. And that's why I'm particularly excited about this panel, because we have 3 really divergent views from 3 leaders that, some of whom I've known for quite some time now, Dennis, looking at you, and some of whom I've recently met, but all of whom I'm sure you've heard of them and their company. So let's just kick it off and get right into the thick of it. Let's start with Dennis O'Malley. If you haven't heard of Dennis and Caliva, you probably haven't been around cannabis very long. Caliva is one of the largest vertically integrated companies in California. They also, if you've been to any of their locations, talk about operational excellence. It is run beautifully. I've been around some of their facilities, both on the back end from cultivation and the front end. And so we're going to dive into what the innovative practices are that Dennis is doing as one of the largest acquirers also potentially in the space. We can also glean some insight from what companies they see in the future moving forward into, let's say, the next year or 2 years or 5 years. So Dennis, super excited to have you here. Dennis also has some cool pals like Jay-Z that you can also hit on who are not only part of Caliva, but also invest some dollars there. Then we move on to Chris Beals, CEO of Weedmaps. If you haven't heard of Weedmaps, Weedmaps is a fascinating company. You guys have really enhanced your product over the last couple of years. I was messing around on it today, but they're one of the leading technology and software providers in the cannabis industry. They maybe first became known because you could actually go and discover where all of the cannabis companies were originally on Weedmaps. And for an industry that struggled with legality, that was hugely important, both to companies maybe some of you invested in, but also to consumers, to be able to drive consumers to dispensaries to find this medicine or wellness product that they're looking after. So Chris, I'm excited to have you on here, talk about it from a technology standpoint too. Then we've got Megan Halstead-Miller, who's the COO of Eaze. I actually just used your product today, Megan, so I thought I'd mess around with it today to see what new exciting things were happening over at Eaze. Eaze is also a technology company. They are a cannabis marketplace and the largest delivery provider of cannabis. And so if you've had it delivered to your house in some of the legalized states, I'm here in California today, you may have already used Eaze and not realized it. And you've certainly seen their big billboards all over the place around airports around the country. And Megan, having the background of operations, will be really interesting to talk to about the unique challenges and opportunities in delivery, and especially today where we can't pass mics and we also can't go knock on dispensaries' doors as much perhaps as we have in the past. So with that, our esteemed panel, let me just kick it off with some questions. And also I will note that we're seeing all of your questions down here in Q&A. So you're not getting ignored, and we're going to loop those all in at the end. So please keep them coming, and then we will be sure to answer as many of those as we can. And I'm sure we can do answering afterwards as well. So please keep your questions rolling. Dennis, since I've known you the longest, let's kick off with you. We'll put you in the hot seat. Let's talk about today and what happened over the last couple of weeks. You know, the day that we all saw the market start plunging and dispensaries potentially getting quarantined, and I know that that was, you know, happening here in California, Caliva, you really led the way and did some interesting first steps that I think might have actually been some of the triggers to essential services. Can you talk to me and our viewers as a CEO? What did you do when you saw this shaking out, and what was Caliva's reaction to sort of this market then and now?
Yeah, certainly, Codie, and thrilled to be here. Troy, Steve, and Kim, thanks for having us. It's unprecedented times, as we all know. We did a couple things at Caliva. First is we saw ahead of time a bit that there may be a disruption, so we actually increased the amount of inventory that we had in our products. So we thought that there may be some type of disruption moving forward. We had no idea that a shelter in place was certainly going to be impacted. That happened about 12:30. I think on Monday, because I got a call when I had an internal meeting from our head of retail saying that there's now a line out the door. We did a couple things that I think were pretty key. We have a rock star government affairs lead, Hirsch Jane. We have a great cadre of people from like Greenbridge, of Krishid, to be able to help work with regulators. The first call that we made in terms of a reaction to this was we saw the line outside of our dispensary, and we said, can we, under a notion of a disaster type of response, can we get to a curbside pickup? In both the San Jose PD, of which we're based in San Jose, as well as the BCC, have been pretty flexible and extremely accommodating to be able to say that was best for safety for both the employees, but also the customers. So we built up inventories. We immediately shifted to curbside pickup. We then went into touchless signatures for delivery. And I think that the last thing that we're rolling out is a touchless transaction for payments. So a lot of these types of things are normal in other types of industries. And I think when in times of crisis like this, it spurs innovation. And when we look at what consumers want, consumers really want an omni-channel basis. Some still want to go into our store because they trust the people that they talk with. Some absolutely want to be able to pick up on their way on doing any errands, and some absolutely want to be able to have it delivered to them. So we saw a 109% increase in our delivery business overall, and we saw a 600% increase in just our net new customers. So consumers look for omni-channel basis, and within those omni-channel basis, it's not just the shopping experience, it's also the support experience. So they expect you to answer to them when they tweet at you. They expect you to have a proactive and reactive chat when they have questions. But most importantly, they want to call and they want to talk to people. And people still trust people. And Steve was absolutely right. This is medicine for millions of people. And when they want to be able to get the right medicine, they want to be able to ask questions, especially if they're new. And in the end of the day, they want to trust the place that they buy it from. They want to trust the product that they purchased, and they really want to trust the service that they get. And that's what we've really tried to optimize towards, is that trust in the place, in the product, and in the service.
Love it. Thank you, Dennis. Interesting numbers, 600% increase in consumers.
In new consumers, correct.
In new consumers. Fascinating. And have you told those numbers before to anyone else, or are those Arcview first insights?
Those are Arcview first insights. So it was a 70% increase in web traffic, and it was a 15% increase in average order value. So what we saw was just a tremendous amount of, I'd say, interest from people who had not purchased Caliva before, and they came in from all different places, and a lot of that new traffic came in from Weedmaps referrals as well. But we have 4 different locations up and down the state, and we also have THC locations, but also hemp-based CBD locations. But all in all, it was the web discovery, the engaging with the content, being able to chat with somebody online, being able to take a phone call that resulted in either a in-store visit, a pickup, or a delivery.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. Perfect segue, because Chris, I'm coming to you next. So you have a really unique vantage point, I think, being able to get data and see into so many different companies and brands, given what Weedmaps does. So can you talk to us a little bit about what are delivery services and brands doing to keep up with supply and demand? Which products are you seeing push more, both from a type of product and brands, if there are unique insights there? And then do you think this sort of surge in demand will stay? Will it taper off? What are your expectations there?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think for us, it's been interesting because we do, our software, whether it be the point of sale software or the orders and logistics platform, that sort of thing, we're touching essentially almost every legal market. And so I think it's been interesting to see how these trends have played out in different places. I think across the platform, we started to see a pretty heavy uplift, I think slightly earlier in March, and then that carried forward to now where, we're anywhere from 250 to 300% up in terms of the number of orders being placed, similar uplifts. I think we have 107, 108% increase in unique new customers coming on this month versus last month. And so that's been fascinating. I think one of the interesting things is that we've actually seen shifts in purchasing habits overall. And so, for instance, average basket size has gone up. So we've seen about a 24% increase in delivery basket size. And we've actually seen a 49% increase in pickup order basket size since March 1st. But within that, we're seeing higher repeat order cadence rate. So it feels like this is not just sort of stockpiling, it's people actually consuming at a higher cadence, which to the extent people are work from home and dealing with kids at home and all that sort of thing probably makes sense. But contrary to I think what we've seen reported in some other places, we've actually seen a lot of that be focused primarily on edibles, with vapes also getting some of that benefit. But we've actually seen flower in terms of their representative sort of category contribution, that flower has actually decreased by about 21% since this started. And so we have some hypotheses why this might be the case, but whether it be concern about respiratory illness with COVID-19, or it be simply the fact that when you're at home or in an apartment building, that sort of thing, potentially you want something more discreet, and which also ties to the other thing, which is we've seen a lot more purchasing behavior during the workday compared to more afternoon, evening, and weekend trends, which we saw prior to this.
Fascinating. So now we know what all of our employees are doing during the day, huh? Okay, so really interesting numbers. Thank you for sharing. I haven't seen those listed either anywhere. So again, Arcview, you're getting a little bit of an unfair insight. Thanks, Chris, for sharing. Let's move to you, Megan, because Eaze is really one of the backbones of delivery in the industry. And so given this demand, one, what has that meant for your business today? Two, what do you think that means for delivery overall? And three, Eaze just got a massive amount of funding. You guys have started with proprietary products. And so talk to us a little bit about what do you see as the future of Eaze?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here today. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. In terms of how Eaze has responded, I think our first priority has been to keep employees of Eaze and of all of our retail partners and delivery operators safe. So safety has been the primary concern as we have seen the demand spike. So internally, we did set up a team to develop a series of protocols for changes we will make to the changes we've made to the delivery process in the name of safety. So, gloves, hand sanitizer, altered. We received a waiver, so we don't need to collect signatures from customers anymore. So really doing everything we can to make the delivery process touchless. So that has been, the primary focus of the team. The operations team has been to work very closely with our delivery partners to make sure that everyone is safe. we're incredibly grateful for the opportunity to continue serving our customers during this time. But safety is first and foremost. In terms of, what I think this means for delivery in general, it was just a few months ago that we were fighting battles about whether or not delivery was legal in the state of California. So that is a pretty dramatic shift for us to see that cannabis delivery has now been deemed as an essential service. And we're incredibly grateful and proud to be able to participate during, this unprecedented time. In terms of the future for Eaze, so yes, we did raise a large round, and we are entering, Eaze 2.0. The next stage for Eaze is verticalization. So we did recently acquire the Hometown Heart dispensary, and so we are actually, I would say we're walking our talk. Previously, we were a technology provider, and we provided recommendations to our retail partners, and now we are actually running some retail organizations. So that's been a major step forward for us. And I think that's really, the reason that we received that investment is that we've been able to, demonstrate how this pivot for us will help make our own ecosystem more sustainable. So, I think the reason that, the leadership chose to bring me into this role is because I do have a background in working in finance e-commerce companies. And so really taking that background and figuring out how do we build a profitable and sustainable cannabis ecosystem is really, I think, what is the message that is really resonating with investors.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, and certainly helps increase the margins, which we know is important in this capital-intensive industry for sure. Along those same lines, there's lots of people talking on the call right now and asking some questions. So I'm going to pepper in one that I see repeated frequently here, which is, we've talked a lot about the positives for the industry and the surge in sales overall, but we haven't talked as much about the difficulty and the concern that we might all have because of coronavirus and the economy essentially at a stalemate. Is there anybody that wants to jump in and talk about how do you manage, what we at Entourage Effect kind of talk about as the best and worst of times, which means our 64 portfolio companies largely are up in sales, but they need money to meet that demand. And sometimes employees aren't showing up at companies. We have a few companies where they have 30% employee, sort of non-attendance rate right now. Understandable because of health reasons, but definitely makes business tough. So let's talk about a little bit the flip side of this. How do you manage the extreme difficulty of a liquidity crunch, a stalemate in the economics, and coronavirus on the back of this huge opportunity we have in demand and potentially increased legalization easing? Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, Codie, I'm happy to take the first shot at that. There's always, I would say, difficult decisions that you need to make, but in times like this, when there is a increased demand, at least that we see in terms of pickup and delivery, we're doing two things. We're diverting resources that we would normally have in other parts of the business. So if you think of wholesale and inventory shifts, a number of those, more than a dozen people, we've shifted over to be able to manage consumer delivery operations. So I think that's one thing. Two is that in expansion locations, when you look at this, we've accelerated abilities to be able to open up other types of delivery depots up and down the state, and we fast-tracked those. And we said, hey, it's critical to get open now because that demand's there, which obviously takes from other places where you previously had investment decisions. So I think in the area like this, that there's absolutely some great areas to be opportunistic to dive into. But to, in your point, there's not unlimited capital. So you gotta be, I'd say very, very careful in terms of where and how you deploy capital, because there's just so many unknowns that are gonna happen, through the rest of the year.
Totally agree. Chris and Megan, is there anything that you would add to Dennis's points?
I mean, I think for us, being being on the technology side, I think one of the things that's been intriguing is we want to balance ultimately how well these retailers and brands are performing impacts us because they're the ones who license or buy our software. For us, it's been I think there's been a certain duality because obviously we want to self-manage against our own capital and the capital we have, and we have to look forward and try and evaluate what the risk is of there being an actual increased level of downside scenario, regardless of sort of the trends we're seeing right now. But then the other thing is, for us, we have not had the same issue with employees not coming into work because we've got 200 of our employees are basically engineering and software folks, and a decent chunk of them were working remotely, and or to the extent they weren't, they're all working remotely now. But one thing that has been a big issue is that we were going in and reshuffling product roadmaps pretty heavily because things like ice cream truck style delivery support through our logistics platform becomes more important in a time like this. We've always delivered impressions or clicks or engagements, whichever measure you want to use to measure, much cheaper than sort of mainstream channels as against, frankly, a very concentrated pool of cannabis consumer eyeballs. But now, given the increase in volume we're seeing, we're also looking at, do we move some of our impression or engagement-based ad products further up in the pipeline since there's just such a spike in traffic, and sort of how much do we do now given the situation we have, balancing against, how much do we want to shuffle what is, frankly, a very packed 1 to 2 year tech roadmap for our product team. And so it's one of those things where we just reevaluate every single day.
Makes perfect sense. Megan, I want to turn to you about a few things. One, I'd love to hear from you. How does this current state affect your business model, if there are ways that it affects it now? And then two, given your background, what advice do you have for other, perhaps smaller companies, since understand operations and e-commerce, of which I think there are probably tools that all of these smaller companies that many of our angel investors may have invested in. What advice would you give them in this environment? So one, what's happening with Eaze now, given this, this new environment, and how does it affect you? And two, given all your experience, what can you impart to other smaller company founders today in this sort of unprecedented time?
Yeah, thanks, Codie. Yeah, in terms of the business model, so we are mid-pivot right now, and we are going to, kind of echoing the last question, there is a lot of uncertainty, but, we believe we just need to continue to push forward. That said, we are evaluating every day, where our resources are allocated and how we want to, how we may need to reevaluate those decisions.
Let me ask a quick clarification. So when you say you're reevaluating it every day, make that tactical for me. What does that look like? Does that mean every day in this environment, you guys are having a management meeting in the morning and saying, hey, we want to check in? Or what tactically does that look like? Yes.
Yeah, so tactically we've been, we have 3 day a week executive leadership syncs first thing in the morning. And then we have a daily COVID Tiger team meeting that meets to discuss, the very tactical issues. Where are we in developing protocols and communications? Where are we with ordering supplies, safety supplies for the depots, et cetera. So tactically speaking, we are, it's all hands on deck. It feels like this is a strange analogy, but honestly, right now, it feels like Q4 at Amazon.com, right? That volume and needing everyone to be executing in sync. So it's been critical to just stay really focused for us. In terms of changing the business model, the verticalization is changing the business model, but I don't necessarily believe that that COVID is changing the business model. So we are just going to continue down the path of verticalization. We still, this has meant a continued focus on profitability, not just growth, which is sort of where we had seen the industry previously focused. So, I don't know that necessarily changes too much for us. We want to continue to provide a great service to our customers and great technology to our retail partners. In terms of advice that I would give, I would say that this industry had been focused on growth very heavily and eyeballs and customers and top line. And there was not that focus on sustainability and profitability. And so, my advice would be, make sure that before you begin to scale, that you actually have a business model that will support that is profitable at the micro level, so that when you do scale, you can actually not run into the same kind of brick walls that some of us have found we've run into when we were just primarily focused on.
Oh yeah, isn't that the truth? It's the old adage of growth at all costs. Does not work well in a market like today. It's all about profitability. Kind of what I want to do really quickly with the next couple minutes we have. You could imagine that investors on the line are thinking about entry points. The cannabis industry's had an 80 to 90% valuation reset, let's say prior to COVID. Now with COVID happening, I think we have an even more potentially interesting entry point because capital is so starved. So if investors have money and they want to put it in cannabis right now, a good indicator of where to go might be where 3 of the largest CEOs are looking and think are interesting areas of the industry. So talk to us about today, if you were going to allocate capital to different areas or think about acquiring different types of companies, what areas are you looking at? What is drawing your attention as potential acquisition, or as just areas that you want to spend more on that might be interesting? And then given that frame of investors, what do you think about now as an entry point? And maybe even how are you thinking about valuations today? So you can kind of pick which portions of that you want. Let's start with you, Dennis, then we'll go Chris Megan.
Yeah, sure. The first advice I'd give is what not to invest in, and that's anybody going down a path of trying to build out infrastructure today. So I think we need to be careful around when we say that what verticalization is and isn't. The state, at least for California, of our perspective, is completely overbuilt in terms of cultivation and oil extraction. So at least for us, we see that there's an oversupply. So when you focus on the consumer and you really look to saying, okay, how do you serve the consumer the most? Where we are really focused is on payment solutions. So what are the most innovative payment solutions out there that are really thriving in these curbside pickups, in these touchless payments? So we've seen and continue to look at a lot of different types of payment solutions, but for us, it's all about the consumer experience, and it's all about we see the new consumer is where a lot of the growth is. So I would advise any investors. It's the somewhat that previous Cannabis 1.0 was people who did build up infrastructures, and now the war is really going to be able to say who can own the consumer. Who does the consumer trust, and how does that happen? A big facilitator of that are payment solutions. So that's where we're focused our lens on today.
I like it. Chris, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, obviously for us as a company, we're interested in counterparties that are deep and intensive on data structures, how they think of inventory. We integrate with most third-party POSs. We're launching our first analytics and kind of insight offerings later this year. And so, I think just generally, that's an area of interest to us. But separately, I think when you look at the cannabis investment landscape more generally, I think there's a real paucity of operators who are, I think, running sort of rigorous, empirically driven businesses. And I think part of what you're seeing in this is, potentially some of these sort of larger publicly traded groups, frankly, going through a reset in terms of their management teams. Are trying to right the wrongs of the past, and perhaps, the current pandemic is maybe a bit of a pretext for that, or pretense for that. I think to Dennis's point, I think there's an issue where there's, it's a tale of the tape in two different places. I think some operators are really selling this idea of like oligopoly or monopoly control on retail density. We know over time that's going to go away, but separately, I think in the nearer term, those folks are going to have issues because during this sort of issue where there's shelter in place and that sort of thing, one of the things you're trading on is time value and how much people want to travel, and especially now travel, given the fact that they're concerned about catching something. So I think those operators will probably lag compared to where you might think they would operate in this time. But separately, I think, yeah, a lot of these folks who built on these big warehouse grow spaces didn't follow basic principles of pest mitigation or containment if there was to be a pathogen outbreak. And those facilities, frankly, a lot of times I don't think are actually suitable for cultivation. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with the reset. So, you know, I'd also echo what Dennis said to some degree.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. Okay, Megan, it's on to you. And we've got about 60 seconds. So give us your best advice in 60 seconds.
I'll be quick. I mean, I think, you know, just in terms of where we're, you know, where we would potentially be making investments, you know, delivery, local delivery services with strong management teams is always, you know, we're always looking to partner or potentially acquire. And I think just in the broader industry, anything that is, you know, we work with a company called LeafLink, which helps to provide liquidity for our brand and dispensary partners. So basically anyone who's helping solve some of the major problems of the industry, like liquidity. And I would also say, you know, anyone that's strengthening the legal market versus, you know, kind of the helping us be more competitive against the black market ultimately is where I would say we're focused.
I like it. I know we've had a few companies go through Arcview that are distribution and delivery companies. So now you've heard that Eaze might be looking for you. Let me tell you about where I'm going to give you the 3 areas EEC is looking at. So if we've got, you know, $160 odd million at play, right now, the most interesting part for us is we are looking for companies that are distressed. So different than perhaps, you know, these 3 are looking for leading management teams. One of the biggest opportunities we see in this market is to buy at low valuations. We want to do that with still strong management teams theoretically, but there are a lot of companies right now where for the first time ever in cannabis, in my opinion, investors have more of probably the say than cannabis companies have. For a long time, we've dealt with very high valuations in cannabis. And because we wanted to be in this space, we had to part with capital at high valuations and hope they were great management teams like these 3. That's not always the case. So today, if you are an investor and you're able to put capital on the table, you're, in my very humble opinion, getting in at some of the best valuations we've ever seen in this space, especially for a space that's growing at double-digit CAGR year over year. So I'm most interested in price valuation. I'd love to get your 2 cents, Troy, really quickly, since you've seen so many companies come through Arcview as well. What comments do you have? And then we're going to go to Lewis to open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think for, but it's different when you're a fairly decent sized venture capital firm and you've got this whole team that's like looking at all this stuff day in and day out. I think for a lot of investors, this is an opportunity time, but it's also, you know, fraught, because I think you've got a lot of different aspects here. We were already seeing valuations go down and access to capital in the cannabis sector go down. Then, you know, the market tanks, and so that reduces capital. But then you've got, you know, sales going up, and you've got all these different aspects that are playing together, which makes coming up with good valuations for companies particularly difficult. And it's particularly difficult as an individual investor. And this is one of the reasons why we exist at Arcview, because this is an opportunity to be able to, for members, you know, to be able to look at different deals and see what the market really makes sense for out there. Because the last thing you want to do in a capital crisis like this is put the last money in on a company that winds up closing it down, because you're going to have situations where companies that, if they don't have a product that's going to be succeeding in this whole new world, and it's not already out in the market, and it's not hitting a pretty sticky problem that somebody who's winning needs a solution for right now, those companies I think are going to have a real hard time. So the best ideas may just, you know, fall on the cutting room floor. And then simultaneously, there's other businesses that are just absolutely going to take off, and it's going to be just bananas. Making sense of that gets so difficult when things change this rapid, and that's why we need everybody together. I mean, I think Gene Sullivan always says it best: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And right now, we have that opportunity to start really looking at these things and evaluating them. So I really want to encourage investors, if not through Arcview, somehow be able to really be sharing deals in a way that you can really evaluate things at a time when it's just all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Troy. And, you know, earmuffs for the 3 entrepreneurs we have on the line, but also when you have pooled capital, you have a lot more power from a valuation perspective. So when you just, you know, are putting a couple $100,000 checks, I don't get to, you know, twist Dennis's arm and tell him that he better give me better terms. But Dennis might be too expensive for me these days. Okay, so should have gotten in early. Okay, so with that, Louis, tell me what we're doing now and how we're answering questions. I think I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Codie. Hi, everybody. This is Louis here, your VP of Member Experience. We've had over 100 questions come in. So unfortunately, with the limited amount of time, we won't be able to get to all of them. But I'll ask the most frequently asked questions here.
And Louis, for those that we don't get to, don't we have a resource on LinkedIn where we can probably post some of the questions and get answers from the group?
We will be posting that to a LinkedIn group that's currently being built out, but certainly we'll be capturing all the questions and providing an opportunity for discussion there. Thank you. And
members can do it on your platform as well, right?
Correct. Yes, members will have access to that as well. Thank you.
Okay.
But let's get to one of the most frequently asked questions here. You know, we shared a lot of great data on this call. Dennis, you talked about how you saw this 600% increase in net new customers, but really the folks on the call are interested in products and what these consumers are buying. So could each of you go a little bit more into what specific trends are you seeing? Are you seeing an increase in an uptick in edibles because people don't want to be sharing vapes and pre-rolls and things like that? An increase in CBD versus THC products? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Like Chris said, we saw a pretty significant increase in edibles in terms of share of basket. Vape was number 2 in terms of category, in terms of the increase. And again, we attributed that to just really being indoors a lot. But we also saw we have a hemp-based CBD business, specifically a cold brew coffee that we saw a significant increase in subscriptions as well. So we saw it somewhat all across the board, but edibles and vape were the 2 categories that we saw increase the most on our end.
Outstanding. Thank you. Megan, do you have any insights for us?
Yeah, I'd actually echo that. You know, we, in addition to the much larger basket sizes we've been seeing the uptick come from edibles.
Awesome. Chris, what about you? Have you seen any trends with this new situation that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, so I you know, earlier I mentioned the uptick we see in edibles. I think the other thing I would mention, just based on the traffic we're seeing, is we're seeing people engage in increased amount of search, review, price compare, that sort of thing. And so I think what we're seeing is people being more sensitive to searching for particular products or potentially a little bit of bargain shopping. But on the flip side, we're also seeing an uptick in the cadence, frequency of purchasing, the average basket size everyone mentioned, which I think points to something else, which is in terms of cannabis as a counter-cyclical good, you know, often it's drawn an alcohol comparison and you know, based on sort of comping it out and looking at what we're seeing, it feels like it's probably closer to prescription pharmaceuticals or something that's higher on the kind of base need scale than alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much for those insights. You know, and for this next question, you know, let's go international for a bit. We've talked a lot about the American market so far and how the COVID-19 crisis has affected the cannabis industry. But, you know, as some of the largest players in the industry, I'm sure you have insights and connections into our friends across the pond or up north or up south. So do you have any thoughts or into how this crisis is affecting non-American cannabis markets? Codie, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. Well, I've always thought that Europe is really interesting. So we have one company that's already live in Europe. And the most interesting part I think about that is the fact that we actually potentially could get government subsidization of product. That would be a differentiator hugely for people who need cannabis continuously. Europe, you know, the tough part about Europe is that every single country has such disaggregated laws. It's one of the most difficult, I would say, geographical areas to do business in. And in a crisis like this, they don't have the infrastructure with companies like Eaze and Weedmaps that are local to them and as integral to the ecosystem as we do in the US. So I haven't looked at the actual numbers, but I would imagine it's much more difficult for people to get access to product over there. And they certainly do not have the slew of products that we have available in the US. Canada's a different story. Canada's at least valued at a more interesting level than previously, but given their slow move to market and rollout, and the fact that they don't have the innovation they're in or the huge populace, I am very strongly biased to investing in the US and Europe if they have a really, really already established throughway into a market like Germany that could be one of the largest medicinal markets out there.
Outstanding. Thank you. I know we're running short on time. So is there anyone else that wants to weigh in on this question about international markets? Do have one last one, and then I'll turn it over back to Troy and Steve, because we have a little giveaway that we'd like to do as well. Okay, well, we'll go on to the one last question that I have here. And so this is for Chris and Megan and Dennis. We talked a little bit about what steps you're already taking to ensure that your part of the supply chain is clean and not being affected by the coronavirus. But what tips can you share with other operators up and down the supply chain, from cultivators who, with the outdoor growing season coming up, to last mile delivery? What are some steps that they can take to ensure that their people, that equipment is all safe from being affected from the coronavirus? Do you have any tips to share with us?
Yeah, well, I think everyone's going to be affected without question, and it's, to us, what's been most important is providing all of our employees and customers, but especially our employees, with as much information as possible. So my only advice is what we did at Caliva. We set up a 24/7 hotline for our employees. We set up an intranet so that people can get real-time information. We're sending text messages if there's any updates needed. And instead of me doing town halls, I now do video messages that get sent out to everybody. So as it's a fluid situation, as we are now more remote than ever, it's important to stay as connected as ever. So at least for us, my advice would be to over communicate and find great ways to communicate with your employees. And it's critical that everybody has the information so that they can make really local decisions to be able to protect themselves and customers.
Dennis, to get tactical on that, is there anywhere that you think you guys are doing something really different in your communication methods? I know how hard it is to communicate across an employee network.
Yeah, I don't have a benchmark for it, Codie, but again, I'm happy to share on it. But it's been we have a 24/7 hotline that anybody can call in with any types of questions or reporting of anything, and those are daily updates that I provide on that. There's a weekly video message that we send out on Vimeo, and you can get a password to log into, and we have a text, all employee text opt-in, opt-out basis to be able to get alerts, and then we have just intranet to be able to go to. So it's just like consumers, you have to go to employees and allow them to be able to communicate with you in the manner that works best for them. And so we've tried to over communicate as much as possible throughout this very, very fluid process.
Sorry, Louis, I wanted to steal all his ideas.
No worries. Steal all the thunder that you like. Chris, Megan, do you have any tips to share with us?
Yeah, I'll throw. So for us, a lot of what we're focused on is given this, how can we support the evolution that's happening with the businesses and let them do it safely? So, I think to that end, through our POS and delivery options, ways to get people to sign or to verify their identity or to check them into a storefront that doesn't involve touching stuff. We're already working on it because it helps improve store throughput and efficiency, but obviously it's doubly critical now. The other thing is we've always, I think, had a pretty broad gap in terms of how cheaply we deliver cannabis consumer eyeballs versus things like non-specified channels, like Google-esque type AdWords type things, or out of home or that sort of thing. But I think now, given how quickly you're seeing Product inventories fluctuate, and you expect you're going to see that continue throughout the year, as well as stores having to rapidly change store hours, change procedures, some of that of their own volition, and sometimes because it's been enforced by state regulators. So for instance, Michigan's doing a really heavy push to accelerate delivery. Increasing the number of tools we offer that let businesses engage directly with their followers, with people who are going to come to their store in advance of coming to the store, or real-time. We're really pushing stores to move towards real-time menu updates, because especially if someone's going to leave during a time like this, not having accurate inventory is a real pain point. And so if they're using one of the many POSs that does real-time inventory integration, making sure that folks have it turned on just to reduce crowds or confusion in stores.
Great, thank you, Chris. Megan, anything to add here?
Yeah, I would just, well, one, I would echo information and communication, as Dennis talked about, being critical during this time. And then I would just say, you know, we developed a best practices guide for our entire, for our retail partners and our own dispensaries, and really focused on ensuring that, you know, the guidelines contain sort of CDC or better recommendations on safety practices.
Awesome, thank you so much. Well, that's all the time that we have for questions, folks. Sorry that I can't join you with my webcam. In addition to toilet paper, webcams are also sold out on Amazon. But let me turn that back over to Troy to close us out here. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Louis. Thanks, everybody. Well, we did it. Turns out you can still do business on the web. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Couple things to close out. Next Wednesday, April 1st, Tim Seymour, CNBC's Tim Seymour, will be hosting our next webinar, Arcview Access. This one will be just for members and their invited guest. And we're going to have two private, sort of curated companies that'll pitch during the session. Things that are really geared towards this moment in history. And we have some live chat features on there so that, you know, we can really help get our members connected and to really be evaluating these companies and other ones like them. If you're interested in membership, definitely let us know. I think there's a feedback poll coming up here. And you could also just send a message to sales@arcviewgroup.com if you want to learn more about that. The next publicly available thought leadership webinar like this one will be in 2 weeks. That'll be April 8th, so keep a lookout in your inbox for those kinds of information. You have a webinar, a survey that just popped up. Really appreciate you putting your feedback in there. We want to know what topics you're interested in us covering as we move forward with these. And you can go to arcviewaccess.com where we'll be sharing the replay, and you can find out about the Arcview Access Slack channel and about our new LinkedIn lounge. And there's a bunch of things we're going to be rolling out digitally. The interesting thing about this is that, we were already none of this stuff is new. We were all planning all of this before all of this. And so it just kind of worked out that moving in digital ways was kind of fit with the moment. Also, Arcview Market Research and our partners at BDS, we're releasing a few reports in the next few weeks. One is going to be about branded cannabis revolutionizing the market, so keep an eye out for that. And then also, we'll be releasing the State of Legal Cannabis Markets 8th edition, which will be great. And so we'll be doing the Q&As in the LinkedIn Lounge, and then also the 1,000th registrant from this event today gets a signed copy of Steve's Cannabis Manifesto. Do we want to pass it off to Steve? Let's see Steve actually sign the book and choose the person. You there, Steve?
I am here. And are we still on the same person that we were?
Yes, I think so.
Yep, on the same
All
person.
right. So the winner is Morris. And Morris, I think it's either Partee or Partay, man. And I'm gonna say it's Morris Partay. And so here we go, Morris Partay. Be well, be free.
All right.
And I really mean it. Be well, Morris. Be free. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then we also have a special offer on becoming an Arcview member. This is Arcview's 10-year anniversary. So there are some opportunities right now to become an Arcview member for less. I'm not sure how long those will go along, but if you send a message to sales@Arcview, or if in this poll you just say you want to have someone reach out, they will do that. And lastly, I will just say, be safe out there. Take this seriously, but don't take life too seriously. And good luck in evaluating all the moves. And I wish that we can be helpful to you as you continue along your cannabis journey during these very bizarre times. Be well, be free. Take care.
Take care.